Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ELTons Festival of Innovations. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mina Patel, and it is my honour to be your host for this session. The session is interactive, so you will see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A section. If you have any questions or comments, please pop them in there. We will be asking you questions and there will be polls throughout the session. We are interested in what you think, so please engage with us as much as you'd like. We are very fortunate today to be joined by two brilliant scholars. Renowned etymologist and broadcaster Susie Dent is with us today, as is Dr. Barbara McGillivray, who is a leading expert in computational linguistics and digital humanities. And together we're going to be exploring innovation through language, focusing on the evolution of English. The 90 Words project was conceptualized by the British Council as part of their 90th anniversary celebrations, with the aim of curating a list of words that had gained prominence since 1934, when the British Council was founded, to 2024. In a moment, Barbara will give us an overview of the project and share some highlights with us, which is very exciting. After that, we'll bring Susie in for a conversation. But before that, before we do any of that, let's see what you think. Let's start off with our very first question about the future of English. Okay, so how do you feel about the future of English? Does it worry you? Would you like it to stay the same? Or do you welcome the changes? Tell us what you think. Quite a few people who are welcoming changes. A couple of people who are worried, though. It'll be interesting to explore later why. Okay, brilliant. Any more for any more? No. Oh, hold on, we have some more. Also, we have overwhelmingly people generally are welcoming changes. That's really, really positive. A few would like it to stay the same and a few more a little bit worried. Okay, so I'm not going to delve into your responses just now. We'll come back to that question. But without further ado, I will hand over to Barbara to talk us through the 90 Words project. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Mina. So I'm going to present results of our project on how the English language changed. And we'll start with some general themes that we found in this list of 90 words. First, global English. Globalization and a more interconnected world meant that many new foreign words were adopted in English vocabulary. And here's just a few examples of words that came from different countries into English. Curry has an interesting etymology because it's actually obviously refers to meal served at an Indian restaurant, but it's partly a borrowing from Dutch, partly a borrowing from Portuguese, perhaps a borrowing from a Dravidian language. Then we have avatar, dates back to 1986 as a new sense, a new meaning, which so refers to the sort of the bodily form taken by the Hindu deities, and now, of course, it refers to computer-generated environments. Bollywood is, of course, combines Mumbai with Hollywood, so that's an interesting formation in of itself. We had disco from French, panini, which is a new word from actually 1949, from Italian. Burrito from Spanish dates back to 1934. So you can see the widespread of countries and languages that offered words into the English language. So I have a question for you. Do you know when the word multicultural was first used? Now, is it 1935, 1945, or 1955? So have a think and guess the answer and put it in the chat. So I can see a few people are saying 55, 45, 55. Some of you are saying 35. Okay, they are sort of not too far apart. So it's quite difficult to guess. Oh, some 1920, 55, 55. But in and it is 1935. So as it's often the case with words, they tend to be older than we think. So the word multicultural appeared in 1935, but of course gained popularity over the years, especially in the US. It was often used to describe diverse places like New York City. And in fact, in 1941, there was a newspaper article that praised the multicultural way of life in the city. And of course, it's a word that is very common today, but it might be surprising to us to know that it dates back to 1935. Another theme that emerged in looking at the list of words that we produce using digital methods is science and technology. And of course, over the past century, there have been lots and lots of technological and scientific innovations that have been reflected into the language. So we have a mix of new words and new meanings. Nylon has an interesting story that dates back to 1938. And it was actually a made-up word that sort of was created to refer to the ending of very common fibers like cotton and rayon that were ending in on, and so it was a word that was coined by DuPont Co, and they felt like the word ending on might be a good choice. So that's how the word originated. Quite interesting to see how sometimes we have sort of artificial creations of words. And alongside this, we have nuclear, which appeared as a new sense in 1945, and of course it took on a political weight with the advent of atomic energy. Virus is a very interesting one. Again, a new meaning. In 1950, first it was referring to infections, and then of course we're familiar with the more recent meaning of virus to refer to malicious software. Artificial intelligence, not everyone may know that it actually dates back as a new word, a neologism, to 1955. And of course, it's a term that is very, very common today. And there are many. We can mention ebook, 1988, because it's an interesting formation with the E preceding a very common word, like book. And we have this phenomenon of adding E to existing words with e-bike, e-reader, e-commerce, e-cigarette. So it was a very productive prefix. And so each of these words is a snapshot of innovation that really reflects the rapid changes in how we live and communicate. And in fact, if we look at another set of words that have to do with technology, but more specifically with the rise of the internet and social media, we have some interesting examples here. Emoji was a neologism from 1997, and it's combination, it's actually from Japanese. So E meaning picture and emoji meaning character. So actually it has nothing to do with emotion. It's just a coincidence. It sort of sounds similar to emotion, but actually it has this etymology from Japanese. Metaverse is another interesting one. Actually dates back to 1992. It was coined in sci-fi, but of course it really surged in popularity in 2021 when Facebook was rebranded as Meta. And then we have web, Google. Blog is a blend of web and log. Zoomer is, of course, a very recent one from 2016. It's a mix of Boomer and the video app Zoom, to sort of refer to the digital generation. So these are words that sort of capture the spirit of the internet age, which has been, of course, so important in our recent history. And then moving on to another theme that is has sort of quite a few words. It's entertainment and language. So in the mid-20th century, we have culture movements and media that transformed our language, giving rise to words and new meanings. So I'll just pick one example, DJ, so disc jockey, which dates back to 1941. And it combines disc, like in music records, and jockey as someone operating a machine. So, so you see actually quite a range of words that we still use today and that reflects a moment of history and sort of cultural shift. So here's another question for you. Where does the term cliffhanger originate from? Is it a TV commercial, a song by Elvis Presley, or serial fiction by Victorian writer Thomas Hardy? Have a guess? Okay, I can see 3, 1. People are 1, 1, 3, 2. Okay, a mix of answers. Serial fiction, 3, 3. Okay, yes. I think most of you seems to be pointing to 3. Commercial. Yeah, there's a little bit of a debate going on here. Right. So the answer is actually 3. And it originated from Thomas Hardy novel installment. The character was literally left hanging from a cliff. And then, of course, people were eagerly waiting for the next episode. And so the term has come to describe any sort of suspenseful moment. Another theme that we found in creating this list is the one about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And of course, this aspect captures how language evolves to reflect. Where is it going too far? Here, the slides. Sorry. Here we are. Yes, so here's a series of words that reflect the changes in the context of identity, rights, and inclusion. So terms like gay and queer shifted from derogatory connotations to affirming identities. Then we have a glass ceiling and intersectionality that sort of highlights the structural barriers and social language as a tool for visibility and empowerment. And then we move on to another really important theme, language and the environment. Yes, here we are. So starting from the 1960s and especially 1980s, have a new vocabulary of words that are related to the environment, like sustainability, biodiversity, forever chemicals. That's the most recent one from 2018. So here I have another question for you. When was the word vegan first used? 1941, 1944, or 1949? Very close together. It's really hard to guess, but have a go. Okay, I can see some answers. 1944, 44, 44, 41, 49. Okay. Yeah, so okay, a few more guesses. 44. And the answer is indeed 1944. So vegan dates back to 1944 when the Vegetarian Society refused to create a section for non-dairying vegetarians. And so Donald Watson and Dorothy Morgan decided to start an own newsletter, and they called it vegan, combining the first and last letters of vegetarian. And then another really important theme, of course, that resonates with us in the recent years is COVID-19 and the effect of the global pandemic on the English language. This is just one example of word bubble that, of course, existed before, but acquired the meaning of social bubble, which we are all very familiar with during the lockdown. But there's lots of other words that appeared in the COVID and with COVID-19 and the pandemic, like quarantine as a verb, or COVIDiot, or long COVID. Zoom fatigue is another one. So here's another question for you. A question about staycation. Yeah, let me advance. Here it is. When was the word staycation first used? Okay, here's the range is a bit bigger: 1951, 1944, or 1963. It's clearly not a word that appeared with the COVID-19 pandemic, but a word that actually gained prominence during COVID. Okay, I can see some answers. And 51, 63. Lots of people are saying 51 or 63. 63, 51. Yes, and it did change during COVID. Well, the answer is actually 1944. So as often is the case, where words and meanings actually much older than we think. So this is, of course, a blend of stay and vacation. And it was first recorded in 1944, but of course it also revived during the COVID-19 pandemic. So a few reflections about what this means for the language we speak and the language we teach. As linguists, we know very well that it's impossible to predict with a formula whether word or construction will become part of the language or not. It is something that, of course, language teachers to keep in mind and react to. Some words can have very short lifespans. So truthiness is an example. It was a neologism from 2005. It was invented by the US humorist Stephen Colbert, but actually died after a few years. It didn't really stay on. On the other hand, words that had a much older history and can sometimes reappear. So spam, for example, is a classic example of language evolution. It was sparked by Monty Python sketch and referred to brand of canned meat, but over time it expanded to all canned luncheons, meat, and then eventually to refer to unwanted emails that we all know today. Okay, so I've prepared a final quiz for you. So are you ready to know how many Gen Z words do you know? So here's a list of a few words and their definitions. And some people say none. So let's try. Maybe you know some of these. Try to match the word to the definition. So we have Delulu, Zuma, Zaddy, situationship, and Riz. Too many. Okay, yeah, just try and guess. A few of them may be quite transparent in their formation, and a few of them may be a bit obscure. So what does Delulu mean? Zuma. Okay, yes. People are defining Riz as charisma, delusional, Delulu, situationship as romantic relationship. Yeah. Okay. Just so I'm going to show you the answers and see how many you've guessed. So here we are. I think quite a few of you had already guessed them, but yeah, it's just a little fun way to end my presentation. So I'm going to thank you and hand over to Mina.
Thank you very much indeed, Barbara. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We've had quite a few people just put random words in the Q&A. I think wondering when they first came into being or how they use and things like that, but we'll come to those. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I'm going to bring Susie into the conversation. So Susie, lots of words, both in the chat, the Q&A, and from Barbara. For you, the most surprising or the most interesting in the list? What do you think?
There were two that stood out for me. Hello, by the way, everybody. I think staycation, which Barbara obviously talked about, that was a real surprise to me. And I live in the dictionary every day of my life, but I still had no idea that it was from the 1940s. But then I think I probably shouldn't have been so surprised, because we have been creating what we call portmanteau, or these kind of mashups of words, for a very long time. We have had smog since the 1900s. We've had brunch from the 1890s, and one that always really surprised me, and I don't know how many of our audience will know this one, but hangry, which is very popular in British English to essentially describe the anger or the irritation you feel when you haven't actually eaten. So it's when your blood sugar plummets and you become really irritable through lack of food. So obviously that's a blend of hungry and angry. But that's 1918, first used by the author Arthur Ransome. So we have been blending for a very long time, but staycation certainly stuck out to me, Mina. And the one that actually I thought would be much earlier, conversely, was graffiti, which is only from the 1950s, because obviously archaeologists have been discovering graffiti for centuries. I looked up graffito, which is the singular in Italian. It comes from the Italian for scratching, because these drawings were often scratched onto the walls of caves, etc., in cave art. So that one is the 19th century, but that one was surprisingly late for me.
Okay, fantastic. So graffiti, I too expected that to be much, much earlier. Actually, that surprised me also. I know, Barbara, you've just been presenting, but same question to you. From the work that you've done on the project, which couple of words stand out for you as most interesting or most surprising? And then I think I'm going to take a couple of audience questions.
Yeah, just a few examples. Babysitter, for example, is as old as 1937, and also there are a few theories around its etymology. Maybe so about the caretaker, so sitting on the baby in one room or while the parents are doing something else, or maybe it may come from the hens sitting on their eggs, so caring for their chicks. So I thought it was quite interesting how the word was created from a quite concrete action of sitting. Then I also was fascinated by metaverse, because it is as old as 1992, but most people are probably familiar with it in very recent years when Facebook was rebranded. And now it's the company is called Meta, and it's gave rise to the whole genre of way of communicating online.
Barbara, I've just been looking at the Oxford English Dictionary, which will give me the very first use of meta itself. So in the sort of the current sense, which is often self-parodying sometimes, that's 1980s, but as an adjective, 1876 is the first use of meta. So again,
Wow.
yeah, so that one's pretty old. If anybody, by the way, in the Q&A was interested in the first use of things, I do have the OED on hand.
But can I just ask you there, Susie, so meta used in the same way as we use it now?
No, not in the same way. So specifically in chemistry, interestingly enough. So it was about I'm not a chemist, but it's a configuration of attachment. So it's two carbon atoms separated by one carbon atom. So I think the idea is I don't know, that it is somehow sort of sitting above. Any chemist in the audience will understand this. So in a meta position is something that has specific meaning in chemistry. But yeah, that one has been around for a while.
Okay, so a bit like meta language in teaching then.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah, sitting on top and above.
Yeah, because it reminds me, of course, of the Greek meta as a preposition meaning around or about.
Exactly.
So it's very productive in the many languages.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to one of our questions from the audience, actually, one of the earlier ones, which I really did like. Hold on a minute. Stella, where has your question gone? It was about literature. I can't find it. I'm sorry, Stella, but I can find.
I think it was asking how many isn't
Wasn't
literature
word-
actually quite a big catalyst for language change?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, here it is. I've got it. Stella. Sorry about that. I thought language development owed a great deal to literature, perhaps just the old-fashioned ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy for either one of you to take that.
Well, I can say a
Okay.
few words, but
Yes,
Susie.
I'll follow up.
Okay, I think it's really interesting because, of course, historically, lexicography drew from literary sources heavily compared to other types of sources. So we have, all the dictionaries quoting authors as a sort of the primary source. But of course, this was always the case, and it is definitely changing because sort of taking literature as a model is not what sort of descriptive linguists would always only do. We increasingly need to look at how language is used in social media, for example, in other more informal settings to really capture the most rapid changes that are happening. So, but it is interesting how there was a really heavy focus on literary sources, particularly in early lexicography and dictionaries.
Yes, I would say the same. And I think that was fairly inevitable. Again, if you take the Oxford English Dictionary, many of the original editors were also editors of Shakespeare. They were Shakespeare scholars. So inevitably, they relied very much on Shakespeare for their first records, their earliest records of a particular word. This has led to Shakespeare's reputation, which is justified in many ways, of being a great linguistic inventor and having come up with many, many words that we still use today. Whereas in fact, the likelihood is that although he probably didn't coin them, he was picking them up and absorbing them like a sponge from the voices around him and giving them voice. So there's no doubting that he was linguistically so exuberant, played around with language, almost like no one else, and was amazing. But it's very likely that actually we will, what we call in lexicography, antedate or predate a lot of the words and phrases that we currently attribute to Shakespeare. And also, Barbara, you mentioned the sources that lexicographers look at these days. Lexicographers essentially use these vast databases known as corpora. It's a bit of an alienating name, but these are the most incredible databases of current language. They contain billions of words that are drawn from social media, as Barbara said, from newspapers, from scholarly journals, and yes, from literature as well. But as much evidence of current language as we can find are fed into these databases, and that's what lexicographers use to chart which new words are coming up, which words are fading away, which words are getting new companions or are being used in different ways, how they are changing slightly. One that's always fascinated me is the word ambitious, which used to be an entirely neutral word, as in to be ambitious was to want to progress in life. There is now an edge to it slightly, which particularly for non-native speakers of English can be very tricky. And if you look at the words that are being used with ambitious, there is often a sense of ruthlessness, of unscrupulousness, of the desire to get on at the expense of other people. So we can see all of this from the databases that we are examining, and it is an absolutely fascinating watch. I think it's the best gig in the world, actually.
Brilliant, brilliant. So talking about how words take root or don't take root, we have another question. Thank you, Jenny Woodman. What helps a word take root and move from being a new word to being part of common language? So how do words do that? How do they kind of have a foundation suddenly?
I wish we had an answer to this. Sometimes it is so mysterious. I am often asked, how can I get my word into the dictionary? So a lot of us have our own family words. We have our own sort of, the language of our group and of our community, and people want to get that into a dictionary. And Barbara will have some great views on this as well. But from a lexicographical perspective, we look to see how often a word is used, because English is a democracy entirely. It's all about usage. How many different sources it is used in. So it can't just be used on one website endlessly. And whether it is being riffed upon as well. So whether we are seeing variations of the word. So we talked about the language of the pandemic. We saw older words come back into currency, like quarantine, which began during the Black Plague. But we also saw riffs on COVID. So I think Barbara mentioned COVIDiot, someone who just stood too close to you and therefore risked infecting you. So that's when you know that a word has sort of landed in the language. As to how it happens, it is entirely usage. It is entirely getting it into currency, but there is no magic formula that I can give to someone to say, yes, do this and you're guaranteed inclusion in a dictionary. It is a lot more intangible than that, I think. I don't know if Barbara agrees.
Yeah, absolutely. And compared to other language changes, like grammatical changes, that for which linguists have found some sort of general tendencies, or even some laws, or some theories that can help us, predict, sound change, for example, with so-called lexical change, so new words or new meanings. These are so closely connected to new concepts, new connotations, that it's basically impossible to find general rules, and that makes this particular area of the language really fascinating to study, because it is so unpredictable and so linked to cultural, societal, technological changes.
I think
That makes it so exciting.
Sorry, Mina.
Sorry, Susie, go for it. No.
I was just going to say that truthiness was one of the ones on Barbara's slide showing how it eventually faded from view. I think that was because the concept didn't fade away, but the words fake news, which of course was repeated a lot, particularly in the US, sort of took over from that, because truthiness was a sort of wobbly truth. It was what Donald Trump's office called alternative facts. And so truth suddenly became not an empirical thing, but entirely subjective. So I think we have carried that concept on. We just changed the vocabulary, which I think is also really interesting.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next. It's a question, yes. Rachel says, hi, I really liked your graph of spam. I'd love to be able to track word use like that, and I think my students might too. My question is, can you recommend any open access online etymological tools so that we can make our own graphs?
So actually, the Oxford English Dictionary links to the Google Ngram viewer.
Yeah.
Exactly. So a lot of the research is also drawn from that. This is really large corpus of text, and it provides easy visualization tool. It doesn't give you the etymology, because that's of course much harder, and it requires qualitative analysis. But if you want to see the progression and the change in frequency of the word over time, the Google Ngram viewer is a great tool, and it's free to use. And you can adjust the time range and different variants of English, even different languages. And yeah, various sort of smoothing techniques. So yeah, this is the first one that comes to mind. Obviously, there are more specialist tools used by linguists, but this is the one I would sort of recommend first.
Brilliant. Thank you, Barbara. Hope that helps Rachel. So we have another question from Harry. Hi, Harry. How are you doing? What fraction of English words have their roots from other languages? And with so many languages contributing to the English language, how can that affect views of native versus non-native speakers of a language that includes other languages?
Yes. Well, I would just say on that latter point, what's fascinating is that English as a language is no longer under control, if you like, and although there's never really been any linguistic government, but of native speakers. So non-native speakers of English now outnumber native speakers by quite some margin, which I find incredibly fascinating. But it has always absorbed words from other languages right from the start, and the influences that I think everyone will be aware of are the Vikings. So we adopted many words from Scandinavian and their language of Old Norse. I'm skipping over a lot of influences here, but we had French, of course, after the Norman conquest, when we developed this sort of hybrid of English and French, because French was quite difficult for us to pronounce. So we created something called Anglo-Norman, and that accounts for a vast number of words in our language. And then we've also had American English as well as, you know, Australian English, and many other, I call them Englishes, like the sort of varieties of English almost does them a disservice. So it is permanently and constantly being enriched by other languages and by non-native speakers' use of English.
Yeah, and if I can just add, having sort of doing research on Latin, and which is a really interesting case because it is a Germanic language,
Yes.
but it has a really large proportion of Latin origin words through French, as Susie said. So, and as Susie mentioned, you often have pairs of words that sort of convey same meaning, but one is a Germanic root and one has the Latin root. So it makes English sort of really versatile and really shares a lot in common with you know, Romance languages, even though it's from a different subfamily within Indo-European.
Brilliant. So linked to that a little bit, we have a question from Omar, who says, how many foreign words does English language borrow every decade?
Oh,
so I don't know if you have an indication, or perhaps even from the project, I don't know.
I don't have a quantification of that. I don't know if you do, Barbara.
I don't have a quantification overall. We focused on finding 90 words that were significant of, you know, the English in the last 9 decades, but this by, you know, means a list of representative words. So I wouldn't know, but I could say it's a bit quite a good proportion. And it's not just English, of course, other languages borrowing from English and from each other. So it's particularly made easier by online communication and sort of more, you know, intercultural exchanges.
I find it. I know there was someone in the Q&A chat who pointed out panini from your presentation, Barbara, and said they didn't like it because it's constantly used incorrectly, because of course the singular is panino, and I have tried going into a sandwich shop and asking for a panino, and it had an absolutely vacant stare back. So I think that is a good example of how English has always, and English speakers have always, changed words to make them, to normalize them in a way, and to make them more familiar with existing words. And we can see that in sound as well as in meaning. So one word that's definitely on the move from a sound perspective is mischievous, which certainly in Britain people are beginning to pronounce as either mischievous or mischievous. They're putting another I in there. I think the dictionary will ultimately represent that pronunciation. I don't think we will change our spelling, because spelling and pronunciation divorced many centuries ago. But we are doing that because we don't have many ivus words anymore, but we do have devious. And people are starting to talk about grievous bodily harm as well. So those are words on the move, and that is part of the evolution of English. And I understand that some people will get quite annoyed by it, but it shows that English is alive and it is not a new phenomenon. We have been changing words and their pronunciation for, you know, well, since English began.
I love the idea of not only English, but languages on the move and changing and borrowing from each other. I just think it's just so rich. But talking about the evolution of language and how it changes, I think we have a lovely question in the chat. And the question is, what is exactly the root of English?
Oh my goodness, it has so many roots. It has so many roots. Sorry, I'm just laughing at someone who said that their Italian friend was outraged when we say panini instead of panino, and cappuccino even when asking for cappuccini, which made me laugh. Apologies. Well, Barbara is probably a good one on this. I mean, it's had so many roots. As she says, it's a Germanic language at heart. but it literally has tentacles in almost every language that it is encountered, because it's famously been called a mongrel tongue. It absorbs words, and so to argue for the purity of English, I think, is a mistake, because it has never been one. It has never had one exclusive influence. I don't know if Barbara would agree.
Absolutely, and yeah, I agree. And then one other fascinating thing from a linguistic point of view is that languages don't just exchange words, but also meanings. And sometimes you have phenomena called calques and semantic calques, where you sort of take in the meaning of a foreign word and you use your own word, or you adapt the meaning of a word. So it actually seeps through not just the superficial level of words, but also what they mean. And the meaning is sort of really fluid concept. And you know, we've seen examples of words that have changed their connotation, even though they broadly kept their core meaning. So it makes the whole phenomenon really, really very, very fluid and very dynamic. So that's what I wanted
Definitely.
So, you know, as this conversation goes on, I love English. English is what I do for work, but I'm even loving it even more, the fact that it's so mixed up and meshed up and comes from so many different places and is so rich. So I'm loving this conversation.
It's what makes, I think, English spelling one of the trickiest educational journeys any of us will ever have to undertake, because of the wealth of silent letters. But the reason I love it as an etymologist as well is that almost every silent letter has a story behind it. There is, you know, that it usually has been put there by one person in the past who will be anonymous, whether it's the H in ghost, which is from one of William Caxton's typesetters, who was from Flanders, and so he added the Flemish geest, H from geest, and it stayed there ever since, to a Renaissance scribe who wanted to return the purity of Latin to our language, and so added a B in doubt, even though we would never pronounce it. So that's why it's incredibly gnarly and tricky, and it's not an easy language, but the stories that it can tell, I think, are just wonderful.
Love the word gnarly, by the way. There's a wonderful comment here that I'd like you both to think about. It's from Chia-Sun Chong. Thank you. Language change is beautiful and fascinating, but the funny thing is, there will always be something that is a bugbear for each individual.
Yeah.
So, what are your bugbears?
That is a really good question.
It is. It's great.
I also like the word bugbear, because etymologically that was like the sort of bogeyman that would come and sort of terrorize people. It was their bête noire, which is, you know, the beast that would come and haunt their dreams. Mine used to be mischievous, actually, until I became fascinated by it. I also now realize that saying the letter H as H is something that most school children in Britain now will do. And actually that one's incredibly circular. So I find that if I am irked by something, I will look it up in the historical dictionary and find out that we did it wrong 5 centuries ago, and that actually this is nothing new. So I try, as a lexicographer, I try to be quite liberal and relaxed about these things. But the fact that we have bugbears means that we are passionate about language, and that's what really matters.
Yeah. Thank you. What about you, Barbara?
Well, actually, because I'm not a native speaker, I'm actually an Italian native speaker. I'm a linguist, so I have a sort of special view on language as a whole. But I mean, it resonates with me what people said in their comments about you know, Italian words being spelled with a thing, and so almost Italian language being associated with the I ending in English, and salami and spaghetti and panini, and so it seems sound like Italian always ends with an I, which obviously isn't true. So that always sparks a reaction in me.
Mina, can I just say that Catherine has just said Americanization is really like sidewalk, and Catherine, that's a really good example of a bugbear that you can dismiss when you look at the dictionary, because that is what we used to call it in British English, a sidewalk, and we used to talk about fall instead of autumn. And the reason we changed all these was because of the Norman influence, and we decided that l'automne from French was far more beautiful. And so we missed the fall of the leaf, which I think is gorgeous, which was symmetry with the spring of the leaf, and spring is short for that. So many of the so-called Americanisms that we like to blame on North American supersizing are actually ours to begin with.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have an anonymous attendee who's asked, building on what Susie said about English being difficult for teachers, teaching English, how can they motivate learners who find English too difficult or illogical as a language? It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. I would say tell stories. I would say tell as many stories as you can of etymologies, of journeys, add some colour. I mean, certainly on the national curriculum here, children are encouraged to know the roots of words and where they came from. And I think just explaining the meanings of words and how they've changed, how silly used to mean quite humble, it was entirely neutral, how lasagna used to mean a chamber pot. There can be some really funny examples that you can add in, and that accounts for, you know, so much of the trickiness. Once you explain the stories, I think one of my favorite examples is definitely, which is one of the most commonly misspelled words in English. And if you just explain that actually it goes back to the Romans word for finishing, and it's a relative from the same family as finish, you will get the two I's, because when something is definite, it is finished and brought to a conclusion. So there are lots of etymological ways, I think, that you can use to add colour and explanation.
Thank you, Susie.
Yeah.
Barbara, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I really I agree with all that Susie said. I mean, ultimately, languages don't develop in a vacuum. They are, you know, they interact with our world, with the culture, and so by reconstructing their histories, we reconnect to that past, and we remind ourselves that, you know, that a language is not no less illogical or illogical than we are, and our past. So yeah, and it sort of reminds us of what we come from, where we come from.
Yeah, excellent. We are nearly at the end of our session, ladies. I would just like to pick up one more comment from the chat, which I really like, and it's from Stephen Thomas, who observes that the panel are using interesting pauses and fillers.
Yes, fillers.
Fillers.
I use fillers a lot. I know I've just used one with there was a really fascinating experiment done whereby an audience was played 2 audio recordings, and it was recording of natural conversation, and in one of them all the white noise, all the ums and the ahs and the likes and the basicallys were kept in, and on the other it was all stripped out. So it was a continuous, very articulate stream of language. The one that was understood best was the one with all the fillers in. So there is an argument that actually these fillers give the listener time to absorb information. When it tips over into the excessive and someone uses like every second word, that's when it gets irritating and communication is interrupted. But there is, when they're used in proportion, there is an argument for using them. But I must try and say and ah a bit less.
Okay, so bugbears, like, as a filler.
Bugbears, like. We've been doing that since 1778, by the way, using like as a filler.
Thank you, Susie. All right, we literally just have a couple of minutes left. We did have one last question for you, and actually it was a repeat of the question we had before, but I don't know if we can bring it up on screen. Here we go. It's the same question we asked at the beginning, and we just want to know what the response is. So, how do you feel about the future of English? Have a vote. Are you worried about it? Would you like it to stay the same, or do you welcome changes? Let's see. Oh, we've still got lots of C's. We have a very positive audience today. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, maybe we've changed a few minds. Possibly.
I think we might have done.
Yeah,
I think we might have done. Okay, so I think it's time to see the results and for us to wrap up. I'm really reluctant to wrap up. It has been amazing. I think we have changed a few minds, because you know what? There's less people that are worried now than there were before. So hopefully it's worked. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you very much to our wonderful presenters, Susie and Barbara. I think that the audience will agree with me that it's been absolutely fascinating and we've learnt an incredible amount. I think we have one last slide, which will tell us what sessions you can go to. But if you look at Rebecca's message in the chat, dive into the whole timeline, exploring evolution of all 90 words over 90 years, celebrating the British Council's anniversary. And she's put the link there. So please, please, please do that, because it is absolutely fascinating. These are the upcoming sessions to go to next. Thank you so much for your participation. Barbara, thank you for all the work on the project and the presentation. Susie, wonderfully, wonderfully interesting and insightful and interesting. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.